realized the cleaning bucket wasn't just for soap. Every time I dipped my brush into the water, the color changed. If it turned blue, I was safe to mop. If it turned crimson, something was bleeding behind the walls. I found a note taped under the rim of the bucket. Do not let the water go clear. If you can see the bottom of the bucket, they can see you. I spent the next hour scrubbing floors that weren't dirty, just to keep the water foamy and opaque. While something heavy dragged itself across the ceiling above me, I entered a corridor where the acoustics were broken. Every step I took sounded 3 seconds later, behind me. I tried to run, but the sound of running feet followed me, gaining speed. I stopped dead. The footsteps behind me kept going for 5 more steps before stopping right at my heels. I felt a cold breath on my neck, but when I turned my headlamp on, there was only a dusty mirror. In the reflection, I wasn't alone. A version of me with no eyes was standing there, holding a mop made of human hair. Clemens said there were 8 offices. I had cleaned 7. I found the 8th one behind a door that felt like skin. Inside, the furniture was made of bone-white plastic that felt warm to the touch. The computer monitor was on, flickering with a live feed of me standing in the room. I watched the screen as a hand reached out from under the desk in the video, but when I looked down in real life, the floor was empty. The video me screamed. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I went back to the nursery because I had no choice. The hallway looped. This time, the radio on the dresser was playing static. Through the white noise, I heard my mother's voice calling my name. She sounded like she was drowning. I looked into the crib, and instead of a baby, there was a pile of old, rusted keys. One of them had my prison ID number engraved on it. As I reached for it, the toys on the floor began to stand up. I found a leather-bound book in the basement break room. It was a log of every janitor since 1924. Every name was crossed out with the same word: recycled. I turned to the last page. My name was already there, written in fresh, wet ink. The entry said, William, shift ends when the light dies. Status: pending. Beneath the text was a drawing of the old man on the couch, but in the drawing he was eating a jumpsuit just like mine. The basement began to tilt. I wasn't walking on the floor anymore. I was walking on the walls. The upward stairs now led into a bottomless pit of fluorescent lights. I had to crawl along the metal shelves to keep from falling into the sky of the warehouse. Below me, in the abyss, I saw hundreds of cleaning carts floating in the dark, their headlamps spinning like dying stars. Something down there roared, and the sound felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. I found a bathroom with a row of 12 mirrors. In each mirror, my reflection was slightly different. In the first, I was still in prison. In the 5th, I was an old man. In the 12th, I was a pile of red meat on the floor. The reflection in the middle mirror stepped out of the glass. It didn't have a face, just a smooth surface of skin. It picked up my bleach bottle and began to drink it, its throat bulging with every swallow. I backed away as the mirrors began to crack. The old man was back on the couch. This time he wasn't angry. He offered me a glass. Drink, William. It's the only way to forget the smell of the freezer-burned blood. I realized the smell from the meatpacking plant had followed me here. The walls began to sweat a thick, dark liquid. He told me Dale Clemens wasn't the boss. Dale was just the bait. The real owner of the warehouse was currently beneath the floorboards, waiting for the cleaning to be finished. Staircase down. I finally took the downward stairs. I descended for what felt like hours. The air got hotter, smelling of ozone and wet fur. I passed windows that looked into other worlds. One showed a forest of gray trees. Another showed a city where the sky was purple. At the bottom, there was a single door with a sign, Exit. I opened it, full of hope, only to find myself standing back in the first bathroom I cleaned at 10 p.m. My shift was starting all over again. My second headlamp began to strobe. The woman in white appeared at the end of the hall, her limbs clicking like a giant insect. She wasn't weeping anymore. She was laughing. I reached into my pocket for the spare batteries Dale mentioned. They weren't batteries. They were human teeth. The darkness finally swallowed the last flicker of light. In the total blackness, a voice whispered in my ear, You missed a spot, William. The shelves in section 4B weren't holding car parts or electronics anymore. As I pushed my cart deeper into the aisle, I realized the crates were open. Inside were personal items. A wedding ring, a child's muddy shoe, a set of keys to a house that didn't exist. Each item had a tag with a date and a name. I found a crate with my own name on it. Inside was the watch my father gave me before I went to prison, the one I thought I'd lost years ago. When I touched it, the watch began to tick, but the hands moved backward, and for a moment, the warehouse walls turned back into the bars of my old cell. The silence was replaced by a hum so loud it made my teeth vibrate. The overhead lights in the basement didn't just flicker. They pulsed like a heartbeat. I noticed that if I stepped in time with the pulse, the hallway stayed short. If I missed a beat, the corridor stretched, adding miles of carpet with every wrong step. I began to dance a macabre rhythm, mopping and stepping to the beat of the building. I realized then that the warehouse wasn't a place. It was a machine, and I was just a tiny, replaceable gear keeping it lubricated with my sweat. I finally saw the security guard Dale mentioned. He was standing at the end of the long hallway, illuminated by a flickering emergency light. He was tall, too tall, his head brushing the high ceiling. He didn't have a flashlight, he just stood there, staring. When I called out to him, his body didn't move, but his shadow detached itself from the wall and began to sprint toward me. I had to dump my bucket of bleach on the floor to create a reflective barrier. The shadow recoiled from its own distorted image in the liquid, giving me just enough time to duck into the nearest office. The last bathroom was the only one left to clean. When I entered, the mirrors were covered in thick, black plastic. A sign on the door said, "Do not look at what is behind the curtain." Naturally, the wind from the ventilation blew the plastic aside. Behind it, there was no mirror. It was a window into the break room I had just left. I saw myself, the other William, sitting at the table eating a sandwich I didn't remember packing. The other me looked up, eyes turning black, and pressed a finger to his lips. He wasn't a reflection, he was a replacement. I went back to the offices to find the paperwork Dale mentioned. The forms were written in a language that looked like English but made my brain bleed when I tried to read it. One form asked for my departure date, but the only options were never and soon. I tried to sign my name, but the pen wouldn't use ink. It drew blood from my fingertip. As I signed the bottom of the page, the office walls began to shrink, the particle board desks groaning as they were crushed together. The warehouse was trying to file me away. I leaned against a concrete pillar to catch my breath, only to feel it move. It was warm. I pressed my ear to the stone and heard a slow, wet inhalation. The entire warehouse was breathing. The stale cardboard smell wasn't the boxes. It was the scent of the building's skin. I realized the dust I had been cleaning all night wasn't dirt. It was dead skin cells from the building itself. Every time I mopped, I wasn't cleaning. I was exfoliating a giant, sleeping predator, and I think it was starting to wake up. The smell of freezer-burned blood returned, stronger than ever. I turned a corner and found a row of meat hooks hanging from the warehouse girders. Hanging from the hooks weren't cows or pigs, but jumpsuits, hundreds of blue janitor uniforms, all dripping with a clear, salty fluid. One of them had a name tag that read Dale. The jumpsuit was empty, but it was twitching, the sleeves reaching out as I passed. I realized then that Dale hadn't hired me because he liked my record. He hired me because he needed someone to take his place on the hook. I found a small transistor radio on a forklift. I turned the dial, hoping for a news report or music, anything from the outside world. All I got was static, until a voice broke through. It was the weeping woman, but she wasn't crying anymore. She was reading out a list of coordinates. I recognized them. They were the locations of every place I had ever lived. Then, she started reading my thoughts. Everything I was thinking, she said a split second later through the speakers. I smashed the radio with my wrench, but the voice kept coming from the walls. The basement living room had expanded. The shelves with porcelain figurines now filled an entire hall. Thousands of tiny, pale faces watched me pass. I noticed that their expressions changed when I looked away. I saw a figurine that looked exactly like the old man on the couch, and another that looked like the weeping woman. Then I found a new one, still wet from the kiln. It was a janitor holding a wrench and a blue bucket. I reached out to touch it, and my own skin felt cold and brittle, like glazed ceramic. The sun should have been up by now, but my watch was a frozen circle of metal. I made it back to the rear entrance where I first met Dale. The door was there, but there was no handle. Instead, there was a punch card machine. I inserted my card, but the machine spat it back out. The red light flashed. Unfinished business. I looked back at the warehouse floor. The darkness was gone, replaced by an infinite, blinding white light. The old man, the woman, and the other William were all standing there, holding mops. "The shift never ends," they said in unison. "We just change the water."